You know, a good reminder from Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 is God always pierces the darkness, always. And the darkness doesn't last.
And the high priest, the great high priest who is Jesus Christ, he puts his hands on your life and you take your hands off and you say, my life is surrendered for your purposes.
Today, I think you'll really enjoy my conversation with Collin Hansen. I've been familiar with Collin for a long time through his writing and work on the Gospel Coalition. He's got a podcast called Gospel Bound. Collin and I discuss what he talks about is cultural climatology, looking at the culture, seeing where it's headed, and then preparing ourselves to faithfully intersect that culture with the good news of the person and work of Jesus. So it's a topic of great importance and something that I think and hope that we all will really benefit from. Hope you enjoy the episode. I want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Downline podcast. My name is Jamie Trussell, the privilege of serving as the lead pastor of Redeemer Dripping Springs in the Austin area and here for the wonderful ministry of Downline. Joined today by Colin Hansen, which I'm thrilled. I've read your stuff for years on the Gospel Coalition. And I don't know if you grew up in Birmingham, but I grew up in Auburn, so we share the state of Alabama.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm not a native, but I have taken to it, so I'm a very grateful tax-paying resident.
Yes, but as you've been asked, I'm sure, which side of the line do you fall? The good, the righteous, or the evil?
The one that has a football coach right now.
Oh, come on.
We're off to a bad start.
Oh my goodness. We have one. He's just interim.
That's right.
Yeah. What got you to Birmingham? Just out of curiosity.
A woman. Why?
There
How
you go.
else? My wife of 20 plus years. So we started dating 25 years ago, and we were in college. There weren't many Southerners, and there certainly weren't many women who were really into college football. And as she kept telling me, hey, Alabama, we were preseason number 3 that year. It was a really big deal. So I got kind of assimilated into the whole state and university experience.
So she went to Bama.
She did not. So her grandparents did.
Okay.
Beyond that and all that sort of stuff. But no, we met in college in Chicago. So
Okay. Well,
typical for Bama fans, right?
Hey, you can tell her, she'll love this. There's only one thing that Auburn and Alabama fans have in common. Are you ready for it?
What is this?
Neither one of them went to the University of Alabama.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah, that's always the. I mean, where I live in Birmingham, I mean, there's Alabama fans everywhere, and I would say it's probably about half and half.
Okay.
to put it that way.
Well, Collin, you serve as, for those that might not be familiar with you in our audience, Vice President of Content of the Gospel Coalition, Editor-in-Chief of the Gospel Coalition, Executive Director for Keller Center of Cultural Apologetics. And I think I saw, are you still doing some stuff with Beeson there in Birmingham as well?
So I co-chair. My office right here is in Beeson. So co-chair of the advisory board, and then I'm an adjunct professor in cultural apologetics.
Well, yeah. So no shortage of activity for you.
It's superfluous titles and responsibilities.
Oh man, you're fine. Well, okay. So recently you kind of oversaw a project, contributed to this, the Gospel After Christendom, which I've really enjoyed digging into, and I thought it'd be helpful for a lot of our people because we hope the podcast helps people, yes, faithfully walk with Jesus themselves, but while simultaneously pouring their lives into others. And there's a skill set here that I think you do a great job of bringing to light, of kind of not reading just what is happening currently, but maybe what's that pointing to as far as what's developing, as far as trends towards the future. And then how do we take the gospel and intersect those trends, that climate, I guess, to borrow from you. But just to maybe start our conversation, what do you mean by Christendom? Probably a lot of people have heard that term thrown out there. Maybe we even studied it in some way, growing up in public school as part of Western Civ courses or something. But when you say the gospel after Christendom, what do you mean by Christendom?
It can be a bit of a confusing term for Americans because the founding of our country was a significant departure from the standard order of Christendom as you saw it develop, especially in Europe. And that's this fusion that you saw for more than 1,000 years in Europe between the church and the state. It's not like the relationship was always static, but you could go to Rome, you could go to Luther's Wittenberg, you could go to Calvin's Geneva, you could go to all these different places, and you'd still see this fusion, this tight relationship between the government and the church. Again, one could be on, they weren't always good friends with each other to see who was ultimately in charge. But you go all the way back to, King Charlemagne in France, and again, more than a millennia ago. In America, it's a little bit confusing because we never had that, and yet we still had a cultural dominance of Christianity. So in the 20th century, you see this collapse. Well, really, it starts with the French Revolution in the 18th century. And then think about places like, communist Russia, places like that in the 20th century. And so you see this collapse of Christian dominance over that culture, and then a real collapse of church adherence at all. The United States, our church adherence has been higher even without that close connection. Yet I think people would say in the 21st century, we have clearly shifted to the point where there is no Christian cultural dominance now either. Christianity is the most populous of a lot of different options, but it's not even a majority perspective necessarily. Certainly not in the number of adherents or people who are in church on a regular basis or anything like that. We have a basic secular default, and that is the opposite of what you would have seen at any moment during Christendom.
Sure. Okay, let me ask you this kind of on the spot. Do you think that's a net negative or net positive as it relates to genuine Christian faith and living it out?
So that is a great question, and probably one of the top few biggest in the history of Christianity, because it goes all the way back to the Emperor Constantine and the Roman Empire back in the fourth century, because you have this basic dynamic of the church is being persecuted, not always everywhere the same way, by different emperors with different motivations, but even into the 300s, some really severe, deadly persecutions that we're probably pretty familiar with. Well, the Emperor Constantine's conversion and the progress of Christianity becoming the official religion of Rome, that was clearly a positive when you come back and you look at that level of persecution. But then again, the persecution coincided with a lot of growth in the church and a lot of dynamism in the church. So where you end up answering that question probably dictates things like, you trend toward being a Presbyterian or a certain sort, or you trend toward being a Baptist or a Presbyterian or an Anglican, both of which have had established state churches, whereas it's not the case with Baptists.
Sure.
And Baptists have been severely persecuted by other Christian traditions. A lot of it depends on where you kind of fall. You look back and say, no, what we need to be preserving is the true church, versus no, we need to be preserving the state, the church's influence and in society. That's a tension that remains with us and every single person's expectations today. And a lot of it also is dictated, Jamie, in terms of where they're located.
No, that makes
even
total
geographically.
Sense. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to read you a quote I thought was really helpful. You say, cultural apologetics, it's a means to reconnect the church to the best biblical and historical resources for presenting and defending the faith. I think when most people, if I can speak broadly, and I may be wrong in this, but when we think about apologetics, it's an argument in a sense. It's here are my reasons, here are your reasons. I want to show why my reasons are superior, or what I think is superior, maybe not even an arrogant sense, but it's a better way. It's a more logical way, a more coherent way. But in reading our current climate, desire, emotion seem to trump reason as a means into kind of getting faith into people's interest. sphere of interest. But what do you mean by how does it help connect us to biblical and historical resources?
Yeah, well, let's just take one example that's very relevant for what we just talked about right
Okay.
there. Imagine that in the course of a couple centuries, you went from Christianity being this persecuted minority, but a large segment of the population, a growing segment of the population, to all of a sudden the emperor is a Christian. And not only that, but now Christianity is the official state religion of the largest and most influential empire in all of human history. But then imagine a little bit of time passes, a couple more centuries, decades, and now all of a sudden that empire is collapsing.
Mm.
Well, now generationally, you have a group of people who they don't remember, they didn't experience the persecution. They only know this fusion, this Christendom fusion of church and state. And they're thinking, if there's no Roman Empire, then can there be Christianity?
Hmm.
Because they're hand in glove. They're the same thing
Hmm.
here. That's how quickly that situation can change. Well, then imagine there's a third group or another group out there at least. And that group is saying, well, I never bought into this Christian thing at all. I'm still worshiping the old Roman gods of paganism. And I think the empire is collapsing because you have turned your back on them. I think we need to ditch Christianity. That's why we need to revive paganism and put you guys back in the arena with the lions.
Mm.
Okay, well, enter Augustine in his work, The City of God. This is what I mean. If you're living in a transition of civilization, say perhaps the end of Christendom, what you need are resources from the past, biblically more than any others, but also through different hinge points in history to be able to help orient you toward this challenge to say, how do we talk to Christians, other Christians who are maybe even panicked about what it means, the end of Christendom, but what do we talk to other people who are gleefully rejoicing the end of Christendom and saying, see, the whole problem here is we'd all be better off if there were no church at all. So that's just one example of how that's been done in history, and one example that we need a lot more of today. People thinking on those terms, because again, after Christendom, it's not clear at all what synthesis of morality and justice and cohesion would be able to uphold the force necessary to govern people. That's completely up for grabs right now, and that's kind of scary. So cultural apologetics is a way of connecting to say, hey, thankfully we're not the first people to have to go through this and have to think about it.
So when I was doing my doctorate out in Biola with a professor out there, Dr. Greg Gansel, we reread a book by a guy named Timothy Chang, and he talked about, his whole premise was basically Augustine and Aquinas had this process of capturing and retelling the current basic cultural narrative, kind of controlling cultural narrative. An example was the fall of Rome, right? That was one Augustine could capture and retell. When you go on to talk about putting tools out there to help us on just in the introduction to develop your climatology skills, it is kind of being able to step back and see this overarching narrative, capture it and retell it in a way that's more aligned with biblical reality. Is that part of the skill set, or what are the tools that you're hoping people can grab hold of?
Part of it, Jamie, is just recognizing that we need to be thinking deeper about these things. So I was talking to somebody about this book not long ago, and she asked me a great question, a real practical takeaway. She said, so imagine we're at a soccer game, standing on the sideline next to a parent, serious conversation, somebody who's very thoughtful, and somebody who is talking about how frustrated she is about the lack of access to abortion. Okay, since Roe v. Wade had been overturned.
Okay.
And then this person asked me, what would you say in that situation? And I said, well, first of all, I don't think there's any problem at all with just saying you disagree, and here's why.
Sure.
I think all life is precious. I'm thankful for this to be overturned. It was a judicial mess back in 1973. I mean, you could say all sorts of things that are pretty obvious. Now, the thing is, they are pretty obvious because they're the talking points that get repeated over and over and over again. But what we're trying to do in cultural apologetics is to provoke deeper thinking and deeper reflection. So, because like you said, so often the conversation is just, you see it one way, I see it another way.
That's right.
But how do you help subvert the other
Mhm.
person's thought process, make them more reflective? And so I said, well, try this. Why is it that parents will do almost anything for their kids? Let's just take youth sports as an example. And because this is at a soccer game, just think the things that you're willing to do for your children, even for a marginal joy or marginal preparation for the future there, because you care for them, because you would be willing to give your life for your children. You don't need to be a Christian to think that way. Plenty of people, all people made in the image of God, plenty of people think this way. So you can start there and say, but isn't it interesting that underneath it all, our culture tells us a different story, which is that what we're aiming for is freedom from any restraint. Ultimately, even it's a freedom from love, because love is always an obligation. You're always
That's right.
obligated to the
Yeah.
people who love you. Now, if you want to throw a real curveball in there, start talking about AI and relationships and sycophancy and people telling you exactly what you want to hear, which is no relationship at all. But my point is, it gets real practical when you're thinking, how do you help somebody to see the way that the story that they're living is completely different from what they know in their actions to be true? They know that the greatest joy, the greatest hope, the greatest purpose that they have in their lives is giving it for other people. Yet they'll keep repeating these same things about, we need abortion rights because we want everybody to have maximum freedom, because your only hope and joy comes in more choice, more freedom, fewer restraints. Well, that's not actually the way you live. It doesn't make any sense. People who
That's
do
right.
that are, there's a way we describe them. We would say they're miserable,
That's right.
because love is always an obligation. It always costs you.
That's a
So
great
that's
point.
just one example of when you're getting past the, let me defeat you in a battle of wits right here, to provoking transformational reflection and ultimately seeing that Jesus himself taught that the way you gain your life for all eternity is by laying it down and trusting it to him.
Well, and something you lay out, which is, I think, really helpful, is kind of getting people to the point where they want the gospel to be true, even if they don't know
Yeah.
what to call it. Maybe that's my
Yeah.
rephrasing of what
Blaise
you write.
Pascal. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's Blaise
but that's
Pascal right there.
but it's that kind of tuning into that, what you really know and desire to be true, and then there's kind of a greater reason as to why that is.
Yeah, there's a combination in apologetics, because we are simultaneously fallen in our sin, original sin, going back again biblically and to Augustine, and at the same time remain in the image of God. So everybody you're interacting with has that basic sense of the divine. Paul talks about in Romans 1 how it's that law's that's inside. Like we know what's right and wrong at basic levels that point us to the divine. And at the same time, clearly, I'm going back to Augustine again, clearly our desires, our loves are disordered. We don't want the right things, or at least we don't want them in the right way. That's kind of what I was getting at there, that you want this freedom, or you want this love because you're made. Christ sets you free. The triune God loves you. Those are good things. You're made in the image of God. The rocks don't talk about that. The goats don't talk about, like, that doesn't make any sense unless you're made in the image of God. And at the same time, though, you are looking in all the wrong places. So, yeah, that's what you're trying to do in apologetics, is help to draw out that you have many good desires, but on their own merits, you cannot possibly achieve them the way that you think, because your deceptive heart and the culture that is just not, it's not telling you the truth about this, but Christ is.
Well, so these are my words, not yours, but as the expert, I'm calling you the expert. Where are we headed? You're kind of reading, you make a distinction here between weather and climate, which I think is really helpful, but you're kind of reading the climate and looking forward. What are some of these big trends and realities that we're going to have to get more skilled at, which I think even the example you presented, learning how to ask questions, good questions,
Yeah.
thought provoking, but
where are we headed, and what are some of the good questions we need to start learning how to process ourselves and help others do the same?
At the Keller Center, we engage in just a form of theological and cultural research and development. So we're trying to get ahead of these kinds of things. And Jamie, we could go a lot of different directions in this, but the one that comes to mind for me is artificial intelligence.
Well, I'm glad you
Probably
mentioned that
because
because I have
we're
no idea
working,
how to talk about it.
yeah. So we're working on a book about this. So Lord willing, we'll have by next summer a podcast, a book, and then ultimately a digital learning cohort for people learning about artificial intelligence. But let's talk about it in two different ways.
Okay.
On the one hand is the false promise that AI will be so successful that thankfully none of us will have to work
Mm,
anymore. And it won't matter that there won't be people anymore. Because, oh, by the way, maybe people haven't noticed in the last 20 years, massive collapse in global fertility. Population is about to drop off a cliff around the
really?
world. Some
Okay.
countries even worse off, especially China, especially Russia. I mean, that's a whole nother massive story to talk about. But the promise is, well, it's going to be so great because we're all going to have a universal basic income and nobody's going to have to work. Except what if work's actually a good thing?
That's right.
What if, biblically speaking, work comes before the fall?
Mm-hmm.
Now, work is fallen like everything else. That's why we experience the thorns and thistles every day. But what if work is actually how we're made to be?
That's
What if
right.
it's what we're made to do?
And tied to dignity in and of itself.
Absolutely. So a world without work that is nothing but leisure, once again, it goes back to that question of why do we think that being freed from restraints is what's best for us? Where did we get that idea? That's a pretty brand new idea. And I don't think anybody likes the way that's going to go. So I mean that's the one way to look at it, which is just the question about work. There's a lot of other ways to look at it. Simply, let's just take this one, and that's the relationship component. I alluded to it
Okay.
earlier.
Yeah.
This has caught almost everybody by surprise that the primary use, especially among young adults and teenagers, of AI is not to help with their homework. It's not to help with their not to help with their research. It's to build relationships. And I don't mean helping to find somebody. I mean the AI itself
Comes to
is the
somebody.
relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a movie about this years ago that's just stuck in my brain called Her that anticipated this exact dynamic. And the thing is, the computers know what we want, not what we need. So the computers are just giving us back, hey, I've digested human knowledge and I can tell you what makes a human feel good in the moment. But of course, that's not wisdom at all. That's just mistaking what's common for what's actually true.
Yes.
The AI cannot tell you what is true.
That's right.
So it cannot, it's like take the worst kind of counseling, a counseling that never challenges you, never asks you to think about things differently, only ever sympathizes whatever thing you want to say, but then even take out the human component of it at all, where that could be adjusted, and that's what you get. So I think we need to be much more equipped to understand that the way our culture is set up to use AI is to eliminate friction, except that friction is life.
And productive. Yeah.
Friction is work, it's relationships, it's love, it's reciprocation, it's learning to be considerate of other people, it's learning to care for others. And in the end, of course, AI can't do any of those things for
Mm.
you.
Mm.
So that's just one example. That's where we're focusing on at the Keller Center, one of our next projects after the Gospel After Christendom. But yeah, I mentioned the fertility one's another thing to be thinking about there. But they're related
Yeah,
because
for
they're
sure.
both related to the broader kind of digital revolution that we've been undergoing for a good 25 some years.
Well, even maybe one question higher too. that wrestling, we don't say it like this as a culture, but what does it even mean to be human? And is that even a big
exactly.
deal? Is that even a
Yeah.
big deal, right?
Yeah. Well, because you have two different directions there. You've had the problem, going backward of, are we different from animals? So you've had plenty of ethicists arguing, well, we're just no different from animals, therefore morality is out the window, or it's just whoever is stronger, or so you look at it that way. But see, now we've adjusted, we have a different problem. Now the different problem is, are we any different from robots?
Mm.
And the more widely we adopt AI, it's sort of like, I remember, let's think about driverless cars. Okay.
Yeah.
And I have some good hope for driverless cars. I'm not somebody who loves driving myself, but we kind of think that there'll be driverless cars and they'll be added to the current situation.
Right.
You don't realize actually that's not how it's going to work at all. To be able to make driverless cars work at a mass scale, we're going to have to actually eliminate driving and change everybody over to that. It's just not going to work otherwise. There's not enough certainty to go along with it. It's actually going to lose a lot of freedom there. That's it. People just often don't think about that next step. They don't think about how the analogy to robots is not making the robots more human. It's making the humans more robots.
Yeah.
That's the analogy is actually working the opposite direction than people think.
So I've got more anxiety over this than I had before now that I've talked to you.
Well, I mean, I do think that one of the problems, I would say a good cultural climatologist will tell you, I mean, hey, at one level, the good news is tomorrow it's going to be sunny, or 2 days after that, where it's going to be rainy and cold, but we're going to get through that. The cultural climatologist says, well, you're really going to want to invest in, a company that makes hand warmers, because people are really going to need them with the kind of the freeze that's going to be coming for a long time. So I think just to be wise as Christians, we're some ways we're more pessimistic simply because we're more reflective. We're not amusing ourselves to death. We're not just blissfully ignorant about anything that's happening. But if we're not also balanced by being far more optimistic than everybody else in the long run, then something's really wrong, because that's what changes your everyday discipleship. Because if you're just out there as Chicken Little saying everything's terrible, it's all going to fall apart, I don't know what kind of disciples you're going to produce, but they're probably not going to be loving, sacrificial,
joyful,
hope-filled, joyful.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. But the kind of disciples you can make when you can say, but isn't it amazing that looking back, what the Lord has brought, even individually or us as humanity, what he's brought us through? And at the same time, we know how this story ends. So while everybody else is freaking out, maybe belatedly, we're thinking, I know what happens at the end of that.
Right. That's
At the end, new heavens and new earth. That's the ultimate climatology I need.
That's right. Well, hey, Colin, we're going to leave it there. Before we go, I'm going to put this on screen, The Gospel After Christendom. Hey, if our folks are interested, and I hope they are, where can they find more stuff? Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. Where can they find you and any more of your work?
Just go to thekellercenter.org. That'll just redirect you toward our page at thegospelcoalition.org or tgc.org. I have a podcast, Gospel Bound. I've got a newsletter, Unseen Things, where we talk about a lot of this kind of stuff. This week I'll be writing, I think, on AI and preaching and teaching. Like, why not just let AI do all your sermons? So these are regular kind of things that we reflect on there. And if by the time this is broadcast, the social media X is still around, they can still just go to Collin Hansen. Find me there.
No,
Who knows?
Who knows? Well, man, I'm so thankful for your time and for your work, and it's fun to talk to someone who, as a native Alabamian and you a transplant, it's good to connect.
It's good. Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy.
All right. Hey, well, hopefully we'll do this again. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Downline podcast. Please subscribe, give us 5 stars, help us to get this content out to as many people as possible as we continue to partner with men and women in the Great Commission as we seek to make disciples as a lifestyle for a lifetime.